You've probably seen those angry street preachers claiming African Americans are the true Israelites, pointing to Deuteronomy 28:68 as their proof. Let's set the record straight. That verse talks about returning to Egypt by ships. After Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, many Jews were literally shipped off to Egypt and sold as slaves. This directly fulfills the prophecy in its historical context. But here's the thing, the verse also says, "But no one will buy you." During the transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans were in high demand. They were bought and sold extensively. This fact doesn't line up with the prophecy at all. Plus, Deuteronomy 28 lists numerous curses for disobedience. Cherry-picking one verse while ignoring the rest of Deuteronomy 28 is a surefire way to misinterpret the text.
The whole universe was in a hot, dense state that nearly 14 billion years ago expansion started. Wait, the earth began to cool, the kings began to rule. Black Hebrews invented schools, we built it all. They built the pyramids, math, science, history, unraveling the mystery. It all started with us being kings. So you will be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. Mm-hmm. Your basket and your kneading trowel will be cursed. The fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land and calves. Okay, you will be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. Now, if I could demonstrate for you that each and every one of these that you have provided for me can apply to another people group, for instance, let's say a specific white people group, would you then claim that they also were Israelites?
So again, like I said, if somebody could demonstrate at least the majority of those curses befalling their particular people group, so not a select one or an isolated one, but the totality, or like I said, at least the majority, then we would have to consider, we would minimally have to consider them being Israelites. Somebody's skin color does not disqualify them from being of the Israelite lineage.
So Native Americans would fit this criteria?
Yes.
Okay, and what are broadly considered African Americans and Africans themselves actually would fit this.
Not Africans themselves, but I would say more so Africans of the diaspora, people who are victims of the transatlantic slave trade. So people African American, throughout the Americas, but not limited to the Americas.
You're talking about the sub-Saharan region, basically.
Yeah, some of those people who were sent the other way as well.
Okay, but this would also apply to Arabs, correct?
No. This
would not apply to certain Arab groups?
Other than if you want to look at certain people like Afro-Iranians, the Qadim in Yemen, I would consider them, but like not broadly the Arabs, no.
Now, my last question here is this historical, meaning that it predates Christ, meaning that do these criteria only apply post-Christ, or would the criteria retroactively go back to also identify pre-Christ?
Okay. I'm understanding. They could. It could be in any time, because if we look in the book of Daniel, during the time of Daniel in the Babylonian exile, he said that these curses had befallen. So these curses cyclically befall Israel during times of disobedience. So we could look at any time after Moses gave this, and we could identify.
So it stops at Moses. I guess that was my, where's the threshold? It stops at Moses.
Yeah.
Okay, so it goes back to Moses. Anything forward of Moses, who is inside of this people group that has these curses afflicted to them, to their people group, you would have to then consider them to be an Israelite.
Yes.
Okay, well, sir, I just want to let you know that I'm looking through the criteria here, and I would say that you could essentially apply this to almost any people group post Moses who no longer exists. I mean, almost all of them, in fact. You will be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. This is very vague, right? This is vague. The Lord will send you curses, confusion, rebuke, and everything you put your hand to until you are destroyed, come to sudden ruin. This has happened to culture after culture after culture. Almost, I mean, this broadly seems to me like it could be applied to almost any now extinct people group post Moses.
So Andrew, I've now, this will be the third time of me stating this. There's now what's 15, what's 68, what's that, 50 something verses with various things. So you're reading the first couple, and we can take a look at those, isolate them, and vaguely say, well, this applies to many people. I'm talking about the curses listed over the course of 50 verses. Once you get, and you could do it. And here's the thing, in my debates, I've did a compiled, itemized list of these things, went over each of them individually, and demonstrated the specificity and the uniqueness to the people who were claiming to be the Israelites, right?
But you said it has to be patrilineal, right?
So I won't accept a broad stroke.
That's fair.
You would have to do that, and you
totally fair. Hey, listen, that's totally fair to categorize. Hang on, to ask me to categorize these for specific people groups. That's totally fair. I'm not disputing that. Okay, that's a fair way to ask for the debate to be done, to structure it for like the Spartans or the whatever the people group is that I want to apply it to. The criteria though is it does have to be patrilineal, right?
Yes.
Okay, if that's the case, then how does this apply to Hispanics? Because the Spaniards themselves were a white group. Patrilineally, they impregnated females who were South American. They're known as mestizos. That's Mexicans. Almost all Mexicans are mestizos. So how in the world would this apply to mestizos?
Yeah, you said lineage. The lineage comes through the father. That's what
comes through the father. It'd have to be patrilineal.
That's a lot of white men.
A whole lot.
That also happened to black people in America. It happened all over the place. So there's not a disputation of that. So we're generally speaking about people, and then of course there has to be like it says in Job 8:8, an inquisition towards people's lineages. Right? Very simple.
Yes.
So we would have to make a lineage inquisition, but also to broad stroke that all Latinos come from Spaniard forefathers is also
just mestizos.
But for example, the Mexican government has rejected the term mestizo, and they don't believe that it ethnically accurately describes the bulk of people in Mexico. Right? So
no, that is not true.
The Mexican government has rejected the term mestizo.
But that doesn't mean that.
That's why there's only.
That's not what I'm disputing. That the Mexican government for political.
But there's a reason why the Mexican government made that move to talk about the people in their country, because they don't feel like it ethnically accurately describes Mexicans.
But let's back up, because I agree for the purpose of political correctness, the Mexican government has made all sorts of different racial classifications because the amount of white people live in Mexico. Like, let's be real. That's why they want to make a lot of different ethnic allocations. There's tons of white Mexicans. This phenomenon is nothing new. Blonde hair, blue-eyed Mexicans all over the place. Not a new thing. Mestizos, though, are indeed, and we have the historic record of when the Spaniards came and began conquering Mexico. They speak Spanish, for God's sakes. The Spaniards came and colonized all of that South American region, all of it. The mestizo is definitely a mix between a white Spaniard and a native who was in South America. Almost now, mestizos. Hang on. Only mestizos, not Mexicans. Mestizos themselves. That is their lineage. And if it's patrilineal, then you would have to say that those Spaniard men, they would have to be necessarily included in this people group because they were the ones who were bedding all of the maidens, sir.
Oh, okay. So Andrew, you're clearly not comprehending. So I'm going to help you out. So when the Spaniard who was bedding the maiden, for example, then entered and planted his seed in that maiden, then that child is not of the ethnic group.
Right.
It's just that simple. So anybody who that's a case of, who comes from that, like I grew up in Southern California, I'm very well acquainted with the Mexican community and culture.
Me too.
So in understanding that, I know different Mexican families, and some are Spaniards, and they're proud of it, right? Most of them that come from Spaniard lineage are proud of it, versus the ones that come from indigenous lineage, right? Or for example, when you have an importation of the black slaves who were predominantly male that came, they mingled with the indigenous women that had babies there. So there were plenty of mingling. So again, it's not absolute. Every Latin American or every black American is an Israelite, but there needs to be lineage and inquisition.
But what I'm saying is that the most of these mixed race groups, what we would consider mixed race groups, especially in South America, and even here in the United States, there's literal, and we know the reason why this is the case, but for most black Americans, there's white DNA there too, because of what was going on these various plantations. Okay, that is the case. So if this is the case, then in this case, any of those children who were conceived were probably the slave master is going to be a man and is going to be white. And then this breaks the patrilineage. It breaks it, just like it would for the mestizos. So this is actually incoherent.
No, and I'll explain why it's not incoherent, right? Because you're taking an absolutist approach, and that's just not the way history works. For example, my great-great-great-grandfather was a descendant of a slave. A slave master had a baby with a slave. That's a daughter, right?
Yep.
My grandfather then was allowed to marry the slave master's daughter, who was a product of. So that happened plenty. It wasn't just an absolute uninterrupted line of white men laid with indigenous or black women, and that's been a perfect line all the way down. That's not what happened. In order for that individual to be absorbed into the black or brown population, they would mingle with that. And again,
I actually understand what you're saying.
My own family.
Yeah, I actually understand what you're saying. You're saying, and this makes sense, right? You're saying from a patrilineal standpoint, let's say a Spaniard came over and, forced himself on a native woman. And then 3 lines down, though, that the offspring of that married somebody else who was in this line. Now that's the new patron. So it's still patrilineally reintroduced. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, sir.
Here's the problem. What percentage is required?
There's no percentage required. It's literally patrilineal. It's not predicated upon percentage. That's what we're saying. It's patrilineal.
I'm not going nowhere. I'm just going to get my charger right quick. I'm just
no problem.
Come out for 1 second. Don't take me down.
So if there's one drop of like 1%, just 1% DNA, which would apply to any of these people groups, correct? 1% of the DNA from the father, then they would qualify as being an Israelite.
That's how patrilineage works.
Got it. That's every human being on planet Earth. Debate over.